What's reflected on this slide is an example of how descriptive and inferential statistics are both applied within the context of research. In this example, in step 1, you start out with a population of college students from which 2 samples are composed. The purpose of the experiment is to determine which of 2 study methods is most effective in raising student scores on a test. One sample group is given preparation materials to read that are printed on a page. The other sample group reads the preparation materials on a computer. Then both samples are given an exam. In step 2 of this example, the sample data for both groups is descriptively organized into a modified histogram, and the average test score is computed for each group. In step 2, it is possible to see that one group's average score is higher than the other, implying that possibly one study method is more effective. However, no conclusion can be made until you apply inferential statistical analysis, such as is described in step 3. Inferential test statistics allow you to determine if there is a statistically significant difference between the average test scores of the 2 groups. Research can be experimental or non-experimental. It's only when a researcher incorporates manipulation and control into the design of the research project that the research can demonstrate a cause and effect relationship between the variables tested in the experiment. Manipulation is where the researcher structures the treatment conditions under which the subjects are tested to be able to vary the conditions differently for each group. An example might be one group gets teaching method A while a second group gets teaching method B, or different dosages of a medication, or the test is taken in rooms that differ with respect to temperature. Control is where a researcher structures the experiment to be able to neutralize the influence of anything else that might impact test scores. For example, if the experiment is about investigating which teaching method is more effective in raising test scores, then the researcher would want to make sure that subjects in both groups are in equally comfortable rooms, had eaten breakfast, were equal in intellectual ability. In other words, it would make sure that nothing else other than teaching method would be influencing the test score. The most important method of control within the structure of experimental research is composing your sample groups in such a way that everyone in the population had an equal chance of being selected. That is the best way of ensuring that your sample group will possess the same variety of characteristics as those possessed by the population, and that you won't inadvertently compose a group of subjects who all possess the same characteristic that would influence the test scores. Other important features of experimental research is the incorporation of a control group or control condition. What this means is that among the sample groups you composed from the population, one or more groups get a treatment of some kind that might influence the test scores, but one group gets no treatment, or possibly a placebo. The scores from this group would serve as a baseline group against which you could compare the scores from the treatment group or groups. The treatment groups are also referred to as the experimental group or groups. Within research, there are also non-experimental methods that are valid ways of conducting research. The only caveat is that when you're doing non-experimental research, you can't establish a cause and effect relationship between your variables. This slide shows 2 examples of non-experimental research scenarios. Both involve comparing 2 groups of scores. In the first example, at the top of the slide, the study uses 2 pre-existing groups, boys and girls, and measures a dependent variable, verbal scores, in each group. The reason this is considered non-experimental is because the researcher didn't apply control in composing the groups using a random assignment method. Sometimes it is appropriate, within the context of a research question, to design groups composed of people who possess a similar characteristic In this case, it's gender. In the second example, the study uses time, before and after, to define the two groups and measures a dependent variable, depression, in each group. The reason this is considered non-experimental is that the researcher can't control what might be influencing depression scores in the time period between the first and the second measurement.